Welcome back, everybody, to the Irish Furian. I am the Irish Furian. In this video, I want to really reveal how, again, I suppose this is what a lot of the videos that I've been doing are about, is the revelation of the manipulation of narrative to suit much larger agendas. So this is going to be just on one or two online pages, and together we'll go through it and see what you think. So here we have an article that was put out by the Irish Times, and I'll just get my so I can scroll through the page. I need my little, you can't see it here, but it's on the background. I have a little so this was put out in 2020, February the 13th, a Thursday, at 04:35. So is he up that early? Good Lord. God, the New World Order is working hard. The early bird catches the entire globe. So, all right, so a friend of mine sent me this. And we're going to take it apart again, piece by piece, and show you how certain imagery, like you see on the screen, is used as a leverage, used as a method of oppression of cognitive thinking, rational thinking, and natural inquisitiveness and questioning. So in this article, the title is called "How to Turn Racist Genetic Arguments Against Them." All right, so straight away in the title, I would ask, what is a racist? You know, that's where I begin. That's where you begin with stuff like this. So really what I want to do is I want to teach you how to think about this, because most people, what they do is they have learned to take in what is told to them on political media outlet sources, news outlet sources and the likes, and they regurgitate what they've been told. So so I would ask here in the title, I'm going to try and show you how to get your head around this: how to turn racist genetic arguments against them. All right, so why? Why? First off, what's a racist? In a previous video I mentioned, I believe that every person from their racial group believes their group is great. I believe the textbook definition of racism, before it got appropriated, shall we say, by all this social justice warrior crap and wokeness. The textbook definition for racism was that you believed your race was greater than other races, and that other races were less than yours. Now, I'll be honest with you, like throughout history, even in African tribes, they believe their people are better than the other tribes around them. They don't have a sense of what's the word? Equality. They believe they are the people, the chosen people. You get me? They believe they're the chosen people. There are even Native American names of their tribes, which literally translates as the people. You know, and you get the same thing in Africa. You get people whose one tribe, even though there's numerous tribes around them, those tribes are the literal name of them is often translated as the people. Not the other people. The people over there are not the people. Our people are the people. So, like, it doesn't make any sense, you know? Like, I do think the Irish are the best race and ethnicity in the world. I do. Doesn't mean I want to harm anybody else. Doesn't mean I want anybody else to suffer as a result of me believing that. That's nationalism. That's love for one's own. But this these kind of articles are specifically targeted at such a sentiment. They're targeted that you don't hold that sentiment, that to make sure you're not able to hold that sentiment. So again, now look in the subheader here. It says every white supremacist has African ancestry and every Nazi has Jewish heritage. Again, falling back onto a previously conditioned narrative to do with the Second World War, to do with Nazis and Jews. Okay, so again, always defaulting back to that one narrative, which again, many will argue has been manipulated and conditioned through media, through storytelling. Did you know that Steven Spielberg, his second name means Mountain of Stories? Did you know that? Stephen, Mountain of Stories. Spiel is a story. Berg is a mountain of stories. Just let you know that. All your memories you have of Second World War, the images you have in your head are from movies created by a man whose second name is Mountain of Stories. So we'll move on here. And let's see. So we'll take each sentence one by one. And it says here, it was funny once. The perfect square bit of dirt on the window, the perfectly square bit of dirt on the window, the shocked reactions of Craggy Island's Chinese community. Chinese on Craggy Island. The local farmer who doesn't have much time to be a racist because he just likes to have a cup of tea in the evening. The feckin' Greeks. But look at the first sentence he opened with. It was funny once. It can't be funny again. Do you get it? So already he's setting the opening line. I was having a chat with a Chinese guy I know here in Cork once recently, and we're having a similar talk about such control of narrative. And they have a saying. He was saying that he who speaks first basically controls the narrative. So there you go. There's a good example of that. It was funny once. The opening line. As if to say it's not funny anymore. Why not? Who says so? Can Chinese people laugh at themselves? Can't we laugh at some guy inadvertently appearing like Hitler because of a little dark piece of dirt on a window? Oh Lord. No, you're not. Don't let people like this control your thinking, control your sentiment, control your feelings. Right? So we'll go on to the second sentence of this. Dermot Morgan's finest televisual moment, the evocation of Nazi speech-making in front of the greatest window in comedy, is perhaps a little less funny now that prime ministers or presidents of Hungary, Turkey, and the United Kingdom and the United States are happy and comfortable to spout racist statements and not merely get away with it, but be applauded for it by their supporters. Okay, so completely untrue. All right, again, that's not correct. Because Hungary and Poland have decided not to take in migrants, okay? And the EU wants to sanction them because of that. The EU is flooding the EU and the United Nations are flooding most European nations with peoples from the third world and outside of the EU, okay? Like, originally it was supposed to be refugees. It was supposed to be asylum seekers. And then we have the leaders of around the world signing the Global Compact for Migration, which is to make migration a human right, okay? And give all rights to the migrant and to suppress the rights of the people within the countries that are receiving those migrants. That was signed on December the 10th, I believe the 10th, in Marrakech in Morocco in 2018. So the fact that there are countries standing up to that and going against that narrative and that push is targeted by people like, what's this guy's name again? Neil Briscoe. Okay, so I just want to show you here, like, what to take one, for example. You know, Hungary is one. Let me see. And what I want to do is show you that. And we'll get back to this article in a second. So this is an official statement by the Hungarian government. And by the Prime Minister Viktor Orban. His statement is, "We are anti-immigration because Hungarians can only be replaced with Hungarians." In other words, having children. All right? Hungary continues to need an anti-immigration policy. Hungarians can only be replaced with Hungarians, Prime Minister Viktor Orban stated at the 9th plenary session of the Hungarian Diaspora Council held on Thursday in the Castle Garden Bazaar in Budapest. The Prime Minister said a country with a diminishing population cannot deceive itself that it can solve the problem of population decline without its own efforts. He said the government will continue to fight related to migration. The government will continue the fight related to migration because this world phenomenon is here to stay. Africa is only just beginning to move. So Mr. Orban highlighted that pro-immigration forces accuse the Hungarian people of having a heart of stone, like the article we just came from and we'll return to. But we have to state loud and clear that Hungary is a generous country. The Hungarians are generous people and are also prepared to take action for good causes. However, help must be taken there instead of bringing problems here. And that's sanity. That is actually rational thinking, okay? You help people in their home countries. You don't bring those countries into your own country in such great numbers that your own country loses its identity, starts to suffer. He's talking sense. So in this context, he informed his audience about a number of Hungarian projects which seek to provide assistance in areas affected by migration, including Iraq, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Nigeria, and Ethiopia. Turning to domestic politics, the Prime Minister highlighted that in the municipal elections, in his view, the government parties had sustained sensitive losses. They were nonetheless given a robust mandate to continue governing the country, and a strong Hungary is in the focus of their programme, which is magnificent. He said financial stability constitutes the foundations of a country's strength, and it is good news that the Hungarian economy rests on financially stable foundations. Good for them. Growth is around 4 to 5%, though he described this data as deceptive, indicating that due to its export-oriented nature, the Hungarian economy responds to the outside world sensitively, and therefore we must react to the cooling down of the international atmosphere with an economy protection action plan. The goal of the government, okay, so that's all about economy. I want to get back down to what they're talking about when it comes to immigration. Mr. Orban described the elimination of poverty as the integration of the Roma as some of the most important undertakings of this term. Fair enough. The Prime Minister said the cabinet has launched a separate development programme for the 300 poor settlements and has also started a major modernisation programme. Good for him. Hungary is doing a great deal, he continued, to make families stronger, because without strong families, there is no strong Hungary. We must stop the population decline. We would need a 2.1% fertility rate. That's replacement rate. The Irish one at the moment is 1.8, I believe. 1.7, 1.8, which is less than replacement. And with abortion is probably implosive and beyond the point of return. But this can only be achieved with a long-term family policy, which could perhaps bring about perceivable results over a minimum term of 10 years, he said. He added that it is to be hoped that next year there will also be a second family protection plan. This is great going. They want Hungarian people to give birth and nurture new Hungarians in Hungary. Now, why would you vilify a nation for wanting that and not wanting to replace its own people with the people from the rest of the world, like Ireland is doing currently? Why? Why would you vilify them? Why would you call them racist for that? Okay, so any more? I can go down on here. He stressed the Hungarian national culture is also essential for a strong Hungary. Fair enough, yeah. Yeah, and he talks about Christianity there. Regarding the latter, he said, we should be grateful to the Almighty that 3/4 of it have already been accomplished. And so the change in the balance of power in the capital can only affect the programmes remaining one. Okay. Speaking about Budapest, the Prime Minister said, Budapest belongs to the people who live here, but in actual fact, it also belongs to all Hungarians. He expressed hope that the quality of the capital of the nation will not diminish in coming years. He also spoke in defence for the need for a strong army, fair enough. There's one part down here I wanted to get to, which is programs, minister of blood circulation in the Hungarian nation. He's magnificent. The Prime Minister also aligned that Hungary must neither overgauge nor undergauge its own role weight and must pursue a foreign policy for which it has the necessary capacity and strength. Regarding Ukraine, he said, despite multiple attempts, it's not related, but I'll read it anyway, he has not succeeded in securing a meeting with you. I won't bother. Okay, so we go back to the other article. The other guy. And get up my interaction window. So, yeah, so you see here, and this is the rhetoric which has been espoused about Hungary, Poland, and such nations that believe in their own identity, and that believe the people who have come from the people before them, as in society is a contract between the generations, have the right to that country, not the rest of the world, like what Ireland is doing currently, which is giving up all of its rights to every ethnicity and race in the world, and why you see 10,000 Irish people homeless. Okay, so yeah, and you can talk about vulture funds and all the rest of it, but 10,000, right? Irish people. Like, there's more than enough houses to house those people if the rest of the world wasn't here. Okay, that's a simple reality. All right, so how have we reached this point? It's the very question asked by geneticist and broadcaster Dr. Adam Rutherford. He's the Rutherford in the BBC's popular radio programme, The Curious Cases of Rutherford and Fry, in which he and Dr. Hannah Fry try to solve listeners' scientific queries. In the case of the resurgence of publicly accepted racism. Okay, what's publicly accepted racism? I still don't understand. What? The fact that people want the country for their own people? Is that publicly accepted racism? Rutherford decided that a radio show was insufficient and that a book would be needed. How to Argue with a Racist is published this week, and Rutherford will be delivering a lecture on the subject during the Northern Ireland Science Festival. So, on to the next paragraph. So, how did we get back here? Back here? You mean, how did we get sense? How do we fight a narrative that you're pushing forward here? So, you know, I'm sorry that you're fighting a losing battle. I find myself asking the same questions. Rutherford says, I find myself in lectures thinking how strange it is that I'm now talking about this, because these are mostly questions that were parked in my field, genetics, years ago, maybe decades ago. And we keep discovering interesting things about evolution and population differences and migration and so on. But the question of how race as a concept relates to biological diversity, that ended a while back. Really? I mean, the fact that you can visually see differences in people is a concept. See, this is where objective truth and subjective truth has no place. Because that your eyes tell you that Africans are different as a race from Europeans. That your eyes tell you that Asian people, Chinese, Japanese, Malaysian, so on and so forth, are different from Africans, different from Europeans. Like, your eyes tell you they're outside, even just by looking at them, that visually they are different. There are different races, okay? He's saying that's a concept. Am I wrong? Am I reading this wrong? I don't think so. So, how to argue? University, and that ended a while back. Yeah, but the question of how a race as a concept relates to biological diversity. Well, maybe he's arguing the opposite. Well, we'll go on a little bit here and see. Having these conversations in the academy is one thing, but as someone who tries to communicate science and to talk about it as a broadcaster and as a writer, I found I was suddenly having very different conversations. Conversations about race. When we were talking about ancestry, in some ways, science has failed to convey to the public what is correct. And so I want to equip people with that current scientific thinking, so that when the question comes up, they have the tools to respond. To say, yes, there hasn't been a white man in the Olympic 100 meters since 1980, but no, that's not because of any lack of African American ancestry. It's almost like inverted speech. You know what I mean? See how they invert? Like, it's like to say, yes, there hasn't been a white man in the Olympic 100 meters since 1980, but no, that's not because of any lack of African American ancestry. It's like the leaving out of one to signify the other. You know, it's it's very grabbly kind of talk, you know. It's kind of like to say like it's been people of African origins, people of African racial origins that have been winning the 100 meters, and that it hasn't been any Europeans, people of European biology, that have been winning the 100 meters. And to say, no, that's not because of any lack of African American ancestry. I don't know. I think he's being intentionally obfuscatory. Is that the word? So, in another part of the article, under a subtitle of "Genetically Better," it says it's precisely that sort of casual, inauspicious racism. So, is he talking to about the previous thing about the 100 meters run? So it's precisely that in the Olympics. It's precisely that sort of casual, inauspicious racism. Why is it racist to say that somebody from a particular ethnic or racial background can run better than another? Why is that racist? Like to visually see that one particular group is very good at something. Why is that racist? I don't understand. You know? I'll tell you why, because then on the other side of that, you would have to say then that Europeans are very good at creating sophisticated and complex societies that work efficiently. That's why. Because you can't call attention to one. They can't let you call attention here to certain obvious truths, because to do so would be to call attention to also to the other, which is what Europeans are good at. Okay, so it's precisely that sort of casual, inauspicious racism that Rutherford looks to quash with his book. The idea that Olympic athletes with African heritage are somehow better because their genes are imbued with extra strength is rubbish. It's not that they're imbued with extra strength. It's that certain groups, it's been shown that certain groups of Ethiopians, from certain areas, have a distinct genetic advantage to run faster. You know, it's just the way they evolved, they developed, or they are, depending on where you're coming from. You believe in evolutionary theory, you would say it's just the way they evolved. If you believe in God and Christianity, you would say it's the way they were created. You know, so take your pick. I mean, but you can see it with your own eyes. You can see these things as a pattern throughout time. These things exist. You can see them. So. With extra strength is rubbish. He says, for a kickoff, using athletes as a test sample is a daft idea, because with the sort of genetic gifts that allow them to perform at the highest level is a poor sample of what a broader population is like. Yeah, but again, he's omitting the one to say the other. He's obfuscating to generalize, you know? So, like, I'll take this apart for you. For a kickoff, using athletes as a test sample is a daft idea, because anyone with the sort of genetics gifts that allows them to perform at the highest level is a poor sample of what a broader population. Yeah, because you're going to have averages, and you're going to have bell curves, and you're going to have outliers, and so, you know, along every population, you can measure an average. Along every racial group, you can measure an average. You can measure the highest in the bell curve, the lowest in the bell curve. You can measure the outlier, you know, which are extremely higher than the average. And then you can actually measure them up against other groups, you know. And you can say, you know, are they higher? Are they lower? Is the average higher? Is the average lower? And you can do that. But you see, this is doing its best to say that you can't do that, you know, in an obfuscatory kind of way. So, better at very quick. Let's see. Beyond that, there's a simpler rebuttal. If those with African heritage are inherently genetically better at running very quickly than others, then where are the Olympic 100-meter champions from South America, Europe, or elsewhere with populations that can trace heritage to Africa? That is so silly. What? Like, I've just said that the people who you, I could have been wrong about the Ethiopians actually for the 100 meters. I think the Eritreans, the Ethiopians were the long distance runners. The 100-meter runners, I think, were of a different group, come from a different ethnic group. Now I could be wrong about that too, but you know, have a bit of fun, go check it out yourselves, and explore it, research it. But he says, where are the population that can trace heritage to Africa from South America, Europe? But they might not be from that group. They might be from a group of people that can even run fast. You know, like South America. Like, is he talking about Africans that have moved to South America, Africans that have moved to Europe? They might not be fast runners. The groups could be too small. The populations overall may be too small. But look at football in Britain at the moment. Look at football in Europe. Some of the teams, the French teams, look like they're from Africa. They're nearly all Africans, you know. So what's going on there? You know, can we call attention to that? Can we say that that's a factor? Does that discount what he's saying? Maybe it does. Maybe it doesn't. You know, the American NBA, all the top athletes are Africans. You know, can we say that's racist? You know, can we look for diversity there and say take out a load of African Americans and put in Europeans? Should we draw attention to that? You know. So, besides tracing your genetic lineage in that matter, looking for secrets and answers to why you are so underprivileged compared with others is nonsense. I don't understand that either. Looking for secrets and answers to why you are so underprivileged. Like, I'm an Irishman. I've never looked for a genetic reason to my failings. You know, why would I do that? That's absolutely silly. I do think that part of the change in culture, which means I kind of had to write this book, change in culture is, yes, there are European countries are being flooded with people from all over the world, and now there is going to be questions on, we say, certain groups are going to be vying for power and control along their racial and ethnic lines. The natives of these countries are going to want to hold on to the power that was imbued to them from their ancestors, which is normal and natural. Is diversity going to work as an experiment? It doesn't seem to have worked in other countries. As I said before, the one future predictor of harmony and peace in one geographical location is ethnic homogeneity, and that's just a fact. Robert B. Putnam actually discovered that when he set out to show that multiculturalism was actually a good thing. He discovered that you know, there were more cons than pros, and one of the actual pros for peace and harmony was ethnic homogeneity. That was it, you know. So, besides tracing your genetic lineage, I do think that part of the change in culture, which means I had to write this book. No, you were incentivized by people to write this book. Somebody paid you to write this, I'm going to guess. Is to do with the rise of nationalism and the more open discussion of race. Certainly there are more open discussions of public racism than at any point I can remember in my lifetime. Yes, because that's cultural Marxism. Cultural Marxism sends diversity, equity, inclusivity down through the genders and down through race. That's cultural Marxism, race and gender. And that's why you're hearing more discussions all the time, because that's taking over more and more. So certainly there are more open discussions of public racism than public racism. What's public racism? Than at any point I can remember in my lifetime. There are other factors though, such as the rise in genetic ancestry testing kits, Now, they're not pernicious in themselves, but I argue that they have fostered a misunderstanding of what genetics means, and specifically in the forms of a sort of reversion to essentialism. So a notion that we're determined by our genes and our ancestry, which as a geneticist, I just don't think are scientifically valid, nor verifiable to the extent that people adopt them. I don't know, you know. I mean, certain races are more inclined towards certain diseases than others. That's a fact. You can ask any medical practitioner that. Okay, I'll just turn that off. I thought I'd muted that bloody messages. Mute for 24 hours. Thank you. God, some people. Anyway, so there are let's see. Certainly there are more open discussions in public. There are other factors, thus, is that there isn't genetic. So a notion that we're determined by our genes and our ancestry, which as a geneticist, you think as a geneticist, he would understand that we're determined by our genes and our ancestry. I mean, like, it's a known fact that people are, we say hemorrhoids, piles, you know, in your bum is a genetic thing. It's passed on. If your father or your mother had it, it's more likely that you will, you know. Diabetes, if your father had it or your mother had it, it's more likely that you will. Like, that's genetic, genetic hereditary. That doesn't make sense. That is the hereditary nature of genetics, okay? So, as a geneticist, you think he would understand that, but he seems to be arguing the opposite here, as a geneticist, which is incredible. I find incredible. So when we move on to the next paragraph, it says, so when you take one of these tests and it comes back saying that you're 10% Swedish or 15% Irish, these are very broad strokes that are not scientifically meaningless, but they are of only trivial relevance. But people attribute great significance to them. For instance, yes, because people adhere around their identity. That's why they attribute great significance to them. People are tribal by nature. People gravitate towards their own. They gravitate towards people of their own race, of their own ethnicity, which you seem to be arguing against here. So when you take one of these tests and it comes back saying you're 10% Swedish or 15% Irish, these are very broad strokes. Yeah, and they're significantly missed, but they're only trivial relevance. But people attribute great. For instance, I sometimes talk about the fact that, genetically speaking, there's no such coherent ancestral group as Celts. But try telling that to an audience in Glasgow and see what happens. Well, that's a trivialization of an actual fact, because the Celts is a broad overarching term. Sorry about this now. I'm just going to pull the curtain across there because it's beaming in down the side of my face. 2 seconds. All right. Oh, fucking hang on. Gotta get these curtains fixed. All right, so I think that's all right now, is it? So try to get it right. So, where are we here now? Yeah, so the Celts basically, yes, he's right in the sense that the Celts were not one particular group. The Celts were numbers of different tribes, many different tribes, all around, I'll put this phone on silent so I won't make that noise again. The Celts were many, many different tribes all over Western Europe. I don't know how far east they went, but they're all over Western Europe, and they did make their way as far as Great Britain. I don't know if they actually made it fully to Ireland. We had our own indigenous peoples here, whose genetics have been here right up to the present day. But he says here, someone's talk about the fact that genetics, there's no, but try telling that to an audience of Glasgow and see what happens. Well, Celts is just an overarching term. It's an overarching term from like many different groups throughout time, a particular amount of time in Western Europe. You can look this up. It's fantastic. It's really phenomenal. All the different tribes that existed who come under the broad category of the term Celts. So they're not wrong in a sense. If Glaswegians saying that they come from Celts, you know, all of those groups that moved west from Europe could be were over the broader term for them was Celts. So we move down here now. We talk about this. So over in Ireland, you've got some of the best genetic genealogists in the world. People like Dan Bradley, head of the School of Genetics at Trinity College in Dublin, who has been tracking the story for the Irish for years. And that's really important work. It's important to understand the movement of peoples and the migration of peoples, but they're always complex. Yeah, we know. Ancestry is a matted web, not linear family trees. Yes, they are, as well as the other. So you're wrong and you're right. And you're right and you're wrong. For example, I have a friend who told me he's descended from Niall of the 9 hostages, and they can trace their ancestry back to him. Well, there's two things about that. One, no one is actually really sure if Niall of the 9 hostages existed, which is problematic for a starter. Why is it problematic? Why is that problematic to him? Why? Why is it problematic that he believes that he's descended from a man called Niall of the 9 hostages? Why is that problematic? What does he want to induce in his readership to believe that believing in the Niall of the 9 hostages? What identity? The fact that he may be actually adhering to an Irish identity? He wants him to let go of that? Why is it problematic? You know, you have to question what's being said. So the second thing, though, is that if he did exist, he lived in the 4th or 5th century, and that's a date which comes before the ISO point, which is the time. Now, I take umbrage to this. This makes no sense to me. I think which is the time at which everyone in Europe is descended from everyone else. Does that make sense to anybody? Okay, so I'll say that again. The second thing, though, is that if he did exist, he lived in the 4th or 5th century, and that's a date which comes from the ISO point. Anybody know what the ISO point is? Does this guy know what the ISO point is? Which is the time at which everyone in Europe is descended from everyone else. What the hell does that mean? What the hell does being descended from everyone being descended from everyone mean? What does that mean? So, you know, multiculturalism. In the 4th or 5th century, there was multiculturalism and everybody was descended from everybody else. And there's no such thing as tribes. There's no such thing as ethnic groups. Because everyone's descended from everyone else, man. You know, so... Right, the second thing, though, is so if Niall did exist and if my friend Bill is directly descended from him, then so too am I. Well, you know, how do you come to that conclusion? And so are you, and how do you come to that conclusion? And so is a guy in southern Italy, and in Turkey, and literally everyone else in Europe. Why not just say the world, man? Like, why not just say everyone in the world is descended from Niall of the 9 hostages, if your friend is correct? You know, this is kind of like where you know, if you're making a point, somebody else can actually undermine that point by putting a broader term over it. You know, like, so I say that person is this, or that person is that, and then my friend will say back to me, well, isn't everyone? Negating the point that I just made a definitive point about one person. You can negate that by saying everyone is, you know, which is what this guy is doing right here. He is negating his friend's adherence to an identity by diluting it out to everyone in Europe. And so he's deconstructing Irish identity again. You see how this is done? Again. So we'll move on to the next paragraph, which is subheaded with overgrown shrub. This is a relatively recent revelation, one that has the power to stun those who claim kinship with any royal lineage, or who might have notions of racial purity. The simple genetic fact is that your family tree isn't a neat family tree at all. It's more like an overgrown shrub. especially the farther back you go. And because everyone else is too, it means that the family shrubs intertwine and merge until once you go back a surprisingly few generations, we're all related to everyone else. So we have no identity. Everybody is the same. There's no such thing as Jews. Jews are not an ethnic identity. Jews are not a people. So they are everybody. You go back far enough, they're related to Africans. They are African, in fact. Jews in Israel, did you know that? And Jews around the world, they're African because they're related to everybody else. That's the reasoning taking place here. So, you want to go down that road? We can go down that road. Thus, the late actor Christopher Lee's claim to directly descended from Charlemagne is accurate, but also meaningless. Not everyone can prove it using family trees. Christopher Lee could, because he was the descendant of an Italian contessa, so that they had the paper trail of her family going back. The whole Danny Dyer story, which showed that he was a direct descendant of Edward III. They were able to paper trail that too. And very few people can actually do that. But I calculate out a mathematical proof that anyone with a long-standing English heritage is also 100% descended from Edward III. All right then. So, there you have... in fact, I'm just curious. Does that point he's making there now not support the idea that if Niall of the Nine Hostages existed, then most people in Ireland who have that lineage can trace their lineage back to Niall of the Nine Hostage? The only difference here is that one has a paper trail, the other doesn't. One was an oral tradition, the other was a written tradition. So, at which point I suggest that we should use our now undisputed and mathematically proven royal lineage to, shall we say, take back control, but Rutherford politely declines my invitation to insurrection. Ha 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 ha. The point is, of course, more profound than working out where you stand in line for throne. It's the fact that every white... Here we go now. All right, here we go, everybody. It's the point that every white supremacist has, if you trace their genetic code back, African ancestry. Every Nazi has Jewish heritage. Every Briton is a mishmash of European bloodlines. Yeah, but see, the problem here is that he's conflating, we'll say... What I always say to people is that you don't live across a timeline. You live in the here and now. And the people who call themselves Irish in Ireland, during the time of the creation of the nation and the state, during the time of the signing of the proclamation and the constitution, all the families in Ireland at that time were then Irish. That's who became Irish, okay? What you don't do is you go back through time as a way to discredit the here and now. You understand? So his point here is the fact that I would also take umbrage with, it's the fact that every white supremacist, I don't know white supremacists. Does anybody know what a white supremacist is? I'm white in Ireland. I grew up surrounded by Caucasian white people. I say I'm an Irish supremacist in Ireland. I believe the Irish people have the right to call this place their home. Above everybody else. Above Brazilians coming here. Above Chinese coming here. Above Africans coming here. I believe the Irish people have a right to that. And because they've had that ability dismantled, their identity dismantled by articles like this in a newspaper, a well-known Irish newspaper called the Irish Times, that they know they haven't been able to do that. They've been demoralized through this kind of rhetoric. And that demoralization has led to what we have currently, which is 10,000 Irish people homeless, while we have 1/3 to a half of Irish social housing in Dublin and other cities and towns around Ireland being non-Irish. Okay, because the Irish are no longer able to collectivise around their identity, because they're constantly dismantled and attacked through more sophisticated speech and writing and language like this. But I've given you previous statements and rhetoric that has done that in less sophisticated ways. But this is a more sophisticated way of doing it, but it is still the same thing. So the problem of so we move on there. The problem, of course, is that while all of this science is correct and provable, it's also useless in the face of racism. Like, again, what's racism? Okay, as someone once said, you can argue with a racist, you can argue with a Labrador retriever too, for all the good it will do you. Well, yeah, your arguments don't hold up, you know, and if that then makes you think that you're right simply because you call them a name, a racist, well then you're back to being a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old. And rational critical thinking is no longer your domain. So moving on to the next paragraph, which is subheaded as misunderstanding genetics. Rutherford agrees, but says there's a more important battle on 2 fronts to be fought. Part of the book discusses actual neo-Nazis and white supremacists because they're obsessed with genetics. And their misunderstanding of genetics makes them think that they can prove some sort of racial purity, which is a nonsense. Arguing with those guys using science is a demonstration of the old Jonathan Swift maxim that you can't reason someone out of a position that they didn't reason themselves into. Well, I've been doing a bit of reasoning here with you now, and you can call me a Labrador if you want. Who I'm really interested in reaching, though, are those who aren't racist and who don't think like that. Because of relying on stereotypes or myths or the cultural sphere that says that race is real, or that some factors are biologically encoded, and that some factors segregate by race, I want those discussions to be the ones that are informed by science. Because those people aren't fundamentally racist, so when you're armed with facts, you're armed with a knowledge of history. But I think that is your best route to change. What change? To what? To turn ethnically homogenous European countries and Ireland into non-ethnically homogenous countries? Is that the change you want? Science is a powerful ally. It's the best ally we have, I think. But what's the Bob Dylan line? I know my song well before I start singing. I bet you do. One of the ideas I explore is that scientists need to get more involved. It's no longer good enough to simply say, here's the data and let society decide. Racists have no such compunctions and will use every tool at their disposal to spread their message of evil and hate. So if we as scientists sit back and say, hey, it's just the data, man, and I don't know what the political ramifications are, that's for others to discuss, then we're volunteering ourselves to defeat and for our voices to be silenced in favor of populist emotive arguments. And that's the political landscape in which we now live. Populist is just what the people want, you know? So like it's like the original idea of voting for a candidate who represents what you believe. And that person is popular. That's populism, you know? Yeah, I mean, isn't democracy still democracy? Don't we have democracy anymore? How's the lighting there? I can't go up anymore. I think the battery's running down. Bring that a little closer so you can see my flushed face from what the bloody sun out there. Okay, so right, so we go on to the next one. Hopefully we're getting to the end of this bloody thing. Racism isn't wrong because racism isn't wrong because it's drawn from and based on a misunderstanding or specious scientific ideas. Racism is wrong because it's an affront to basic human dignity. What I'm saying is, if you want to be a racist, fine, fill your boots, go ahead. But you can't have any of my scientific tools, my weapons, to justify my position. To justify your position. And there's the book, How to Argue with a Racist by Rutherford. Okay. All right. So I hope that was a bit of fun. And this is basically just using science against what is real, against what is true. This is how science is used as a weapon to dismantle, we say, the rights of ethnic and racial groups to adhere to their own as previously done so throughout time and throughout history, whereby countries were formed around those particular lines. At the moment, we know that they're trying to flood European countries with hundreds of thousands of people from all over the world to break down ethnic homogeneity so that global communism and the New World Order can be enacted. And I believe that's what this is. This article is about. This article is a part of that weaponry. And look, it is in the Irish Times, a well-known Irish newspaper. That is my opinion. You may call me what you like, you may agree with me. That is how I feel, that is how I think. And okay, so take care, and I hope that was of some use to you. Until the next time, I'm the Irish Furian.